Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. Today is 19 June, 2026 years after Jesus. It's a Friday. And we're back in Illiberal Education talking about the politics of Rex and Sace on campus. That's right, written by Dinesh D'Souza, and it's published by, it's made available by Free Press in New York. We'd like to thank Free Press for making this material available starting in 1991. We'd like to thank Dinesh D'Souza for writing it. It's dedicated to Laura Ingram, who I've met. Can't say that I know her, but the acknowledgments include, hmm, I see some names popping out. Remember, this is 1991. And which name pops out on page 9, Roman numeral 9? Uh, Harmeet Dillon. Harmeet Dillon, now in charge of civil rights litigation, is prosecuting Second Amendment cases against Democrat-controlled cities and states for violating the Second Amendment. I also see Ken Masugi, a huge part of Clarence Thomas's journey. Um, and Christopher DeMuth, who so graciously and correctly gave Michael Uhlman credit for saving the Electoral College when it was under assault in the late 60s, early 70s. We got Jeffrey Hart from Dartmouth, and we got Harry V. Jaffa of Claremont McKenna College, and we're going through his Aristotle reading. Now, we've discussed chapter 1, and we're in chapter 2. Chapter 2, recall, is called More Equal Than Others. And I thought this would be a really interesting topic for Juneteenth. Today is Juneteenth. It's a Republican holiday. It's one of the several Republican holidays that we have. One is Christmas, one is Thanksgiving, one is July 4th, Memorial Day. I'll just keep going. Easter. um, so we have yet another Republican holiday. Praise the Lord. Um, yeah. So Juneteenth, more equal than others. We're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States of America this year, and the famous second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence goes something like this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." Well, this chapter 2 is called "More Equal Than Others," so this is a great Juneteenth topic here. And we got through discussing um, pages, I think through page 32. Yeah, on 11 March. So as the kids say, it's been an hour. They say it's been an hour. So, okay, we're going to do a fair use of this. Make a transformative reading of this material. Go out and get your copy today. Illiberal Education, the Politics of Race and Sex on Campus by Dinesh D'Souza. I read this in high school. I bought this, not this particular copy. This is a replacement copy. I don't know what happened to my copy, but I bought mine with my paper route money at Summit Ministries, probably in the summer of 1991. Probably. Because I think I did a Chatfield Charter editorial on it my junior year or senior year. I should have muted it before I took a drink of coffee. I apologize. I was lazy. Well, anyway, let's start talking about this, huh? Do a fair use, make a transformative reading of this material. We'd like to thank Dinesh D'Souza for writing. Thank you, Dinesh. Thank you, Harmeet Dillon, for impressing Dinesh back in 1991 or before. Now, once the platform for the free speech movement, Berkeley's famous Sproul Plaza, and that's named after R.C. Sproul, is now a veritable ethnic smorgasbord, with many students speaking to each other in Spanish, Vietnamese, Swahili, and Tagalog. It is apparent to visitors that the 1960s have not really left Berkeley. Can you tell he's writing this in the late 80s, early 90s? There is a thriving street trade in tie-dyed shirts. Wow. You're dating yourself, Dinesh. Well, the copyright didn't dates him for him. Wow, tie-dyed shirts. On the plaza, a man with flashing eyes. 1991, he's saying this. So maybe he wrote it in 1990. Did you write this in 1990, Dinesh? Let us know. A man with flashing eyes was reading poetry. He said he wrote in San Quentin. Admiring students applauded every time he managed a rhyme or obscenity. A group of middle-aged veterans was selling buttons and T-shirts protesting the Vietnam War almost 2 decades after it ended. In a health food restaurant, a man was jerking ketchup onto his cottage cheese and discoursing on Af Afra Ben. Don't know what that is. Reference. Over my head, Dinesh. Genius, eccentricity, and clinical insanity seem to merge at Berkeley, giving the place a wistful charm. Bottom page 32. Berkeley's Asian American students contribute to this visual diversity. In another sense, they stand in sharp contrast to the mood of languorous abandon. Most of them are impeccably groomed, conservative in dress, moderate in manner. Hmm. They were not to be seen among the group cheering the man from San Quentin. In a subtle yet unmistakable way, page 33 at the top, more equal than others, chapter 2. The Asian American demeanor is a challenge to the ethos of the 1960s. Wow, that's a really nice turn of phrase. I like that. Asians do not satisfy an understanding of diversity that requires unconventional attire, involvement in assorted causes, and a general identification with the counterculture. In this sense, they remain outsiders at Berkeley. It is not easy to find an Asian student willing to talk at Berkeley. I passed up two or three who would talk only on condition of anonymity. I approached one student waiting for the library to open, but he was too eager not to miss a minute of reading time. Eventually, I found, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say this name correctly. Thuy Nguyen, T-U, excuse me, Thui, and then Nguyen spelled the normal way. A cheerful woman who turned out to be a student at UC Davis. She knew all about Berkeley, though. She was visiting her friend Cynthia Dong, an undergraduate there. They had gone to the same high school in California. Nguyen wishes that she had been admitted to Berkeley. She doesn't know why they kept her out because, quote, other people with a lot lower grades in my class got in, unquote. Nguyen expressed an evidently common opinion at Berkeley that Berkeley doesn't want any more Asians because they are trying to keep the quotas even. If this is not resonating with you, go back to the 11 March 2026 episode. Start there because that episode was entirely about these Asian students and how they're mistreated at Democrat Berkeley. Nguyen, however, oh, excuse me, Nguyen revealed that her high school GPA was 3.8 out of a possible 4.0, and her SAT score was 1,000 out of a possible 1,600. She had a decent list of extracurriculars, although her grades were excellent. Her relatively mediocre SAT put Nguyen below the mean at Berkeley. She was not assured of automatic acceptance. Berkeley's average SAT score is around 1,200. Nguyen, however, has not had the same advantages in life as most other applicants to Berkeley. She came to this country in 1980 as a Vietnamese boat person. Previously, she lived in a refugee camp in Thailand. When her family came here, they had nothing. Nguyen said, so they, oh, sorry. Nguyen said, sorry, I screwed that one up. When they came here, they had nothing, Nguyen said. So they had to live with an American host family for a month. Even now, they hold menial jobs. Nguyen knew only scraps of English which she picked up at the refugee camp 10 years ago, though, as we spoke, her vocabulary gave little hint of this background. She seemed just as articulate as any of her peers. Despite her own difficulties, Nguyen didn't consider herself a victim. Wow. What do I have to complain about? She said. This is sympathetic. She is sympathetic to complaints she hears on campus from black groups. I'm going to say so-called black, right? Remember? I know they have suffered a lot more than I have, she said. This seems hard to believe. How does she know this? She doesn't, she said, but she infers it from the way campus activists give moving and elaborate accounts of their persecution. They seem so hurt all the time. Man. I have faced some discrimination, Nguyen said, but I don't worry about it. Her philosophy is simple. Page 33 at the bottom. You have you just have to be persistent, page 34 at the top, in what you're doing. Don't worry about how much racism there is in society. The main thing is to focus on what you can do yourself. The future is more important than the past, and you can change the future. Unquote. Nguyen has plans for herself. She's going to be an architect and maybe design recreation parks. Hmm. Contrast Nguyen's case with that of Melanie Lewis, a vivacious black woman wearing a blue polo shirt and denim shorts, whom I interviewed outside the university library. Lewis revealed that she had the same SAT score in high school as Nguyen, 1,000 out of 1,600. Her GPA was slightly lower, 3.6, but still impressive. Lewis said, quote, I know Berkeley was very selective, so I was very surprised when I got here, unquote. Lewis is a strong supporter of preferential treatment for blacks, and I'm going to say so-called blacks. So-called. Racism thrives in America, she said, noting, quote, racial outbursts, unquote, at Berkeley in recent years. Nevertheless, Lewis could not remember a single incident in which she was a victim of prejudice. She said, however, quote, you still have that family history. I may be the richest black person in the world. I may be the son or daughter of Michael Jackson. It's ironic that she said that. But Michael Jackson's ancestors were still stripped of their name and their person, unquote. Well, how far back do you go for an ancestor? And are you only counting the ones that had bad things happen to them and not the other? What about the ones that did bad things? I mentioned that about the son or daughter of Michael Jackson because what year was it? 2016 spring. I believe it was in the spring of 2016 at Loyola Marymount University that I arrived in my classroom in University Hall on the first floor for an introduction to philosophy class called Philosophical Inquiry. It used to be called Philosophy of Human Nature, but the daggum idiots changed it. And sitting in my class with the roll sheet, there was this guy, looked like he was from Texas. He was wearing camo. He looked like he liked guns and big trucks. And he would be what Dinesh D'Souza would call a white guy, a so-called white guy. And his last name was Jackson, first name Michael. And so to get to know students' names, I would give them quizzes right away. And then to have the quizzes in alphabetical order, I would call roll and they would bring their quiz up to me. So when I got to Jackson, I would say, hey, why don't you moonwalk that quiz up to me here? Where's your shiny glove and that stuff? Well, halfway through the semester, one of the other students was in my office hours and said, that's Michael Jackson's son, right? Now, this is in 2016, and it's a bit removed from my childhood in the 80s and the 90s. Michael Jackson in the 80s was probably the most famous person in the world besides Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev. That's probably not too far of a stretch. If it's not, I don't think it's a stretch at all. And given that this kid looked nothing like Michael Jackson, and okay, hold the jokes, you know, either version of Michael Jackson when he in the 80s or later. So I thought he was kidding at first, and then I realized he wasn't kidding. And then I turned around on my computer in LMU office, just Googled it really quick, and there was a younger picture of the same face with a girl, little girl, accepting a Grammy Award for Michael Jackson. I think he was like 10 or something. The 10-year-old version of that same face I had in class, or 11-year-old or 12. I don't know how old he was. And I was like, oh, uh, the first thing I thought was all those jokes. I said I was going through the jokes I did. And he never had any kind of adverse reaction to those jokes at all. He just kind of water off a duck's back. And everybody could tell I didn't know that was Michael Jackson's son. Well, anyway, everything was fine with our relationship. He liked me a lot. He came to our philosophy and film night a couple times, and then in later semesters he would kind of go out his way to go say hi to me and stuff. So that's my Michael Jackson story. So when she says I may be the son or daughter of Michael Jackson, I know Michael Jackson's son. So and he doesn't look anything like Michael Jackson, which is why I said it was ironic. Okay, well anyway, at this point, Lewis became passionate. Page 34 in the middle. I am oppressed. I will always be oppressed. This is a direct quote. Continuing the direct quote. Yes, I came from a good family and an economically stable background, but my race is still deprived, and that will always live with me. I have the Ku Klux Klan to remind me, the Democrats. Every time they burn down a house, that reminds me that I live in a country of racism, unquote. Lewis said that her father is a retired engineer who spent most of his life in the military. Her mother works as a government supervisor. In view of the fact that she is middle class and has not suffered socioeconomic disadvantage, why does Lewis think that she should benefit from preferential treatment? Quote, at places where you have such a majority of white people, and I would say so-called white people, but this is her quote, you start getting prejudices everywhere. That's no good. How can you study with what's going on? Systems flow more easily if you have a better racial mix, unquote. Back to Dinesh here, bottom page 34. But this seems to result in groups such as Asians being denied admissions despite their academic eligibility. Does Lewis favor quotas or perhaps goals to decrease the percentage of Asians? Lewis didn't answer directly. She mentioned the case of an Asian student with a straight A average who was rejected at Berkeley but threatened to sue the university, so he was admitted. Quote, if I were him, I wouldn't want to come here, unquote, Lewis said. Quote, I wouldn't fight so hard to go somewhere that didn't want me, unquote. Page 35 at the top. I raised the example of James Meredith, the first black to enroll at the University of Mississippi. So-called black, so-called. I've never seen a black person. It's it's just an odd use of the term. So-called. Who, okay, so to enroll in the University of Mississippi, who wasn't wanted there. On his first day of class, President Kennedy had to send federal marshals to ensure his safety. Didn't Lewis think it was right for Meredith to fight for his academic right to be there? The Meredith example inspired her. Blacks, she said, have fought to get a chance. Hmm. Can I interject a comment here? I'm in the middle of this direct quote. Blacks, she said, so-called blacks, have fought to get a chance. Here's my comment. There's a lot of people that have fought for blacks to get that chance, like the Republican Party. The Republican Party put guns into the hands of black people. That's what they fought with. And it was at great cost. And it was entirely opposed by Democrats. Keep going. Blacks, she said, so-called blacks, I'm adding, have fought to get a chance. I don't see why we shouldn't get that chance, unquote. Preferential treatment for this reason must continue. At Lewis's high school, she said, 15% of the students are black, so-called black, and 15% are Asian. Asia is a big continent, right? It's the biggest. And I'm not doing an impression of Trump. It's the biggest continent. It includes Lebanon. Okay. Hello. Hello. Anyway, we've talked about that before. Of her senior class, 4 black and 2 white students were accepted to Berkeley, and no Asians. Everyone said that I got into Berkeley just because I was black, Lewis said bitterly. Just as it was easy to admire Thuy Nguyen's modesty and courage, and I'm so sorry, I'm screwing that name up, Thuy. Thuy? I don't know, I'm sorry. I should learn that. My buddy Kent Duncan will help me. Just as it was easy to admire Thuy Nguyen's modesty and courage, it was easy to sympathize with Madeline Lewis, an intelligent young woman placed in a position where she did not get credit for her accomplishments. Even if Lewis received no benefit from affirmative action, she would still remain under suspicion of being unfairly advanced by Berkeley. Anyone can be excused for being jittery under those circumstances. Well, that's very kind of you. Again, we're interacting with Illiberal Education, The Politics of Race and Sex on Campus by Dinesh D'Souza, Free Press, and originally made available in 1991. Geez, crazy. There's a picture of Dinesh right there. We've showed it before on the podcast. Look at that young whippersnapper. God bless you, bro. The examples of these two women, one of them Asian, the other black, so-called black, reveal how affirmative action has largely abandoned its original objective of giving a break to disadvantaged students to enable them to enjoy the same opportunities as their more fortunate peers. If the objective of affirmative action is to favor a promising young person who did not start out on the same line as everyone else, then it is hard to find a better candidate than Thuy Nguyen. Melanie Lewis's argument that despite her socioeconomic advantages, she will always be oppressed because she is black seems to be an unwitting argument against affirmative action. I see that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. I mean, she just said on page 34 of the previous page, she said, I wouldn't fight so hard to go somewhere that didn't want me. Well, then the next page you're saying blacks fought to get a chance. Hold on a second. Well, you're saying you would fight hard, or you shouldn't fight hard. Help me with this. This is within a paragraph. Now, Melanie Lewis's argument, despite her socioeconomic advantages, she will always be oppressed because she is black, seems to be an unwitting argument against affirmative action because it raises the question of how preferential treatment can possibly help such a person. It can raise her standard of living by giving her a Berkeley credential, perhaps, but by her own assertion, even if she gets the best of jobs and becomes a millionaire, she will still be oppressed. Thus, Lewis's victim status seems secure, and affirmative action only rectifies the situation if it can make her so long, if only if it can make her no longer black, so-called black. On the bottom of page 35, I'm going to heat my coffee up and we will continue. No, you don't have to wait. I'll pause it. So, all right, I'm back. I got my hot coffee again. Success. All right. Not to bring up health food, but let us continue. All right. Page 35 at the bottom, we continue our discussion of more equal than others uh, admission policy at Berkeley. Chapter 2 in Illiberal Education, the Politics of Race and Sex on Campus by Dinesh D'Souza. Go out and get your copy today. Get a physical copy made available by Free Press, originally starting in 1991. Okay, now, page 35 at the top. Sorry, the bottom. In the case of Yat Pong Ao, if the case of Yat Pong Ao is unusual, Berkeley officials freely admit that cases such as those of Nguyen and Lewis are typical. Preferential treatment so infuses admission policy that until 1990, only 40% of the Berkeley freshman class were accepted based on academic merit. In the fall of 1991, page 36 at the top, that number has been raised to 50%. The other 50% are accepted under the broad rubric of diversity. Diversity. Merit, remarks a Berkeley official, is no longer the predominant factor in admissions. The university's affirmative action is carried out through two programs called Educational Opportunity Program and Special Action. Ernest Konigsberg, a Berkeley professor of business who has served on admission committees, explains how the programs work. The University of California system of colleges has established minimum standards to do the work at any of its schools. If a black applicant meets these with a grade point average of 3.3, B plus or higher, he or she is virtually certain to be admitted to Berkeley. Such a student would almost certainly get in even with a 2.78 to 3.29 between a B minus and a B grade score, as long as the SAT scores were good, according to Konigsberg. Whatever the grade average, Konigsberg said that an SAT score of 1100 or above would in practice guarantee a black student admission. So-called black. Konigsberg and other Berkeley administrators admit no white or Asian students can get in with these numbers. So-called white. I've never seen a white person. I've seen someone close to white, but you know, um, now so-called white and Asian students need grade point averages of at least 3.7 A minus, and they are not assured of admission even with a 4.0 or perfect average. In 1989, Berkeley turned down more than 2,500 so-called white and Asian applicants with straight A averages. Jeez. Now, while so-called whites are disadvantaged by this, Asian students seem to suffer even more. Nearly 30% of high school graduating Asians qualify academically for Berkeley, compared to about 15% of so-called whites, 6% of Hispanics, and 4% of so-called blacks. In 1986, on Berkeley's academic index, calculated by a formula that takes into account grade and SAT scores with special weight for honors achievement, so-called blacks were consistently admitted with scores of 4,800 out of a possible 8,000. So-called white students needed at least 7,000 to get in, while Asians with scores of 7,000 had only a 50% chance of admission. Whew, wow. In short, page 36 at the bottom, the data suggests that Berkeley, remember it's named after George Berkeley, the philosopher. So if you take modern philosophy, history of modern philosophy in the philosophy department at Berkeley, you're going to study Berkeley, who is the namesake of Berkeley. And they're not going to explain the disparity in pronunciation to you. And so I just call Berkeley Berkeley and Berkeley Berkeley. The data suggests that Berkeley may have set up different ethnic tracks for admission in which students only compete against their peers of the same skin color. Wow, that'd be hard to manage. How do you know it's exactly the same skin color, same shade? What would Lincoln say about that? Quote, we basically have a three-track system now, comments former Dean Wodolski. His charge seemed to be confirmed in early 1989 when an applicant to the Berkeley Law School received notification that he could not be offered admission. However, the admissions officer wrote, we can tell you that you are in the bottom half of the blah, blah, blah waiting list. Wow. In the blank was typed the word Asian. Page 37 at the top. Though Berkeley continues to deny that Asian students are disadvantaged compared to white students, university officials freely admit that Asians, like so-called whites, are disadvantaged relative to other minorities. These officials argue that such discrimination is both necessary and justifiable. Quote, we've got to have affirmative action. Otherwise, the whole freshman class will be composed of Caucasians and Asians, unquote, said Bud Travers, a dapper middle-aged senior official at Berkeley and one of the main architects of its admissions policy over the past decade. The former assistant vice chancellor for undergraduate affairs, Travers now works in the Berkeley Development Office. Berkeley considers him the university's point man on the labyrinthian issues of minority admissions and preferential treatment. All right. Um, so, how much longer we're going to go here? There's a break coming up on 38, and the next one doesn't occur until page 46. So I think we're going to stop at page 38. We'll go a little bit longer here. These officials argue that such discrimination is both necessary and justifiable. Of course, they say that. I mean, the Klan would say that, right? Right? Anybody would say that. Now, Travers was not joking about what affirmative action contributes to Berkeley's race ratios. According to a study by Berkeley's Office of Budget and Planning, merit admissions would result in less than 4% of so-called Black, Hispanic, and American Indian, yeah, sometimes called Native American. I love that. I love that Dinesh does that. Nice job, Dinesh. Nice job. He puts Native American in quotation marks. Good job. Yeah, okay. American Indian students combined. Travers maintained that there is no way to admit more blacks and Hispanics without slackening academic requirements. He argued that certain minorities are entitled to preferential treatment because Berkeley is a state school and must serve the various constituencies in the state, unquote. Democracy dictates that, quote, all groups should be represented, unquote. Nor is that unjust because, quote, the reason we have academic discrepancies is on account of past and present discrimination, unquote. Further, the presence of proportionate numbers of so-called blacks and Hispanics. Every time I say so-called blacks, that's me. It's not Dinesh. Just FYI. This is a transformative reading. It's a fair use transformative reading. This is what it means to be a transformative reading. So I'm putting my stuff in there in this discussion. But I'm hoping that's clear. Um, democracy, democracy dictates. Democracy dictates. um, democracy dictates. Yeah, that, quote, all groups should be represented, unquote. Nor is it unjust because the, quote, the reason we have academic discrepancies is on account of past and present discrimination, unquote. Well, I mean, aren't you contributing to the present discrimination? I mean, is that, you're just admitting that you're part of the problem? Further, the presence of proportionate numbers of so-called blacks and Hispanics will show that those groups will show those groups that, quote, it is possible to succeed in higher education, unquote, and that, quote, they belong here, unquote. Such diverse representation, Travers added, will allow different groups to interact with each other and learn to get along better, unquote. These arguments are reinforced by a seminal article by Professor Randall Kennedy of Harvard Law School in the Harvard Law Review. Kennedy argues that preferential treatment reduces racism because it, quote, teaches so-called whites, he says whites, but I'm saying so-called whites, and that so-called blacks, too, are capable of handling responsibility, dispensing knowledge, and applying valued skills, unquote. Because of the contribution of affirmative action to racial harmony, quote, considering a black's race, a so-called black's race, again, when I put so-called, that's me, and yes, I am fiddling with the quote, but I'm just letting you know, okay. Considering a so-called black's race as part of the bundle of traits that constitutes merit is entirely appropriate, unquote. Those who are affected adversely should learn to live with the injustice of affirmative action because their disadvantages are, quote, simply an incidental consequence of addressing a compelling social need, unquote. Even if the program generates resentment, that too is acceptable because, quote, intense white resentment, so-called white resentment, has accompanied every effort to undo racial subordination, unquote. I'm going to take a cup of coffee, drink a cup of coffee, page 38. Feel free to follow along. Get your copy today. Get a physical copy. Get it. Have it on your shelf. Happy Juneteenth. Page 38 at the top. Bud Travers denied the existence of, quote, intense so-called white resentment, unquote, but acknowledged that a certain amount of racial tension and grievance was generated by giving some minority groups preference over others. You don't say. You don't say. Many so-called white and Asian students at Berkeley, quote, feel that it's unfair that their friends didn't get admitted because they know, quote, they know so-called black and Hispanic students with weaker records who got in, unquote, Travers said. He sympathized with these students, quote, but that's the price we have to pay for diversity. A diversity. Diversity. Sounds like the horror. The horror. The horror. I think there's only two the horrors in Heart of Darkness, which was adapted to Apocalypse Now. But, unquote. Qualified students are denied admission to Berkeley can be accommodated at other schools within the University of California, such as UC Davis or UC Irvine. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to say? He pointed out, quote, the only way to deal with the frustration is to talk about it, unquote, Travers said. Asked about particular victims of the program, such as Thuy Nguyen, Travers' message was, quote, you can't solve every injustice that prevails in an individual life, unquote. Travers' views are fairly typical of admissions officers at selective universities. A pragmatist and realist, he starts from the premise that Berkeley must admit fairly even ratios of so-called whites, so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. He knows that academic criteria won't produce the desired color distribution. Thus, he feels compelled to manipulate admissions requirements to change the result. He is no enemy of academic standards, but he believes that he must subordinate them to the considerations of ethnic diversity. 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 The horror. How many of the horrors was it? Was it two? Or was it? I think it was two. I think it was the horror. The horror, right? Remember? If you saw the movie, it was, what's that guy's name? The Godfather guy? Marlon Brando. Um, and if you saw the book, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, then you saw it in there somewhere, right? I'm sure it's in there somewhere. It's been a while since I've read that book, and my book is really beat up. I have the copy that I had in high school. I was forced to read Heart of Darkness in high school, and I have that same copy, and it's beat up, man, because I had it all through my Navy career. For some reason, it's especially beat up. I must have really liked it. Anyway, he must subordinate them to considerations of ethnic, the horror. Sorry, diversity. Diversity. He is uncomfortable about denying opportunity to deserving so-called white and Asian applicants but he supports preferential treatment on the grounds that social justice must prevail over individual rights. Wow. So if individual rights are not what is served by social justice, then what is served? It would be the opposite of individual rights, which would be tyranny. Does that sound right? Sounds right to me. Apparently, for Travers, individual rights are not an essential basis for a just and harmonious academic community. Okay, we have a breaking point there on page 38 in this wonderful chapter called More Equal Than Others Admission Policy at Berkeley, Chapter 2, of, again, Illiberal Education, the Politics of Race and Sex on Campus by Dinesh D'Souza, made available by Free Press 1991. Go out and get your copy today. Tom Wolfe, the novelist, blurbed it. And so we'd like to thank you for joining us on the Republican Professor podcast here on Juneteenth, 19 June 2026, years after Jesus. God bless you guys. Take care.